Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest live episode of VOX VOMITUS. I'm your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of Pretty Ugly, the Hotel series, as well as the Japanese Box and other stories. Joining me today, as always, is my VOX VOMITUS vixen, Allison Martine, author of The Bourbon Books, which includes Dibs Since September, Move on Melinda, Climb the Salmon Ladder, and The Ranchers Take Manhattan.
Heck yeah.
Heck
Like
yeah.
you're speeding it up. I like it.
My lung capacity is getting better with these inhaled steroids.
It's so nice.
Joining us today, we will hopefully be having two guests, but currently we have one guest, and that is perfectly fine. It is Mercedes Murdoch Yardley. She is one of the authors of the anthology, The Rack. We should be having Tom Deady on. Hopefully he will show up soon. If not, we are thrilled to have Mercedes, who showed up looking like a goddess.
Yes.
So if you're just listening to this audio, please go to our YouTube station or our Facebook page and watch the video, because Mercedes is really giving hair, makeup.
Yeah, I put makeup on today just for you ladies.
We appreciate it.
We appreciate that. That's probably why Tom is late, because he is probably also making sure his lipstick is perfect.
Yeah, his lipstick didn't match his outfit. He needed to change.
That's why you always go with black, because black doesn't really matter what color lipstick. It's correct.
It's correct. So Mercedes, welcome to VOX VOMITUS. This is your first time here on the show, hopefully not your last. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll kind of dive into The Rack and your story in The Rack, which I have to get the title right because I am obsessed. I am a house demanding to be haunted.
I swear that one was written for you, Jennifer. Like when I read it, I'm like, is that tattooed on your body already? Because I feel like it might be.
Freaking out, and I will get to all the reasons why I was freaking out. But Mercedes, tell us about yourself.
Oh, I need to hear what you have to say about that story. My name is Mercedes M. Yardley. I am a writer, usually write horror, also write dark fiction, nonfic. I won the Bram Stoker Award twice, once for a story, Little Dead Red. Thank you. And the other time for a story called Fracture, which is just online, a short story. You can read it for free. Little Dead Red is on sale for 99 cents. You can read that for $1. And I live in Las Vegas. I play the ukulele. I have 3 kiddos. One of them has Williams syndrome and autism. And I have a really dumb but wonderful dog.
Oh, you have a wonderful dumb dog.
Oh, that's right.
My dear, for Mercedes, we could probably ask Dustin to throw in like more Mercedes facts, but I think yours were a great starting point, and I love all of that stuff. And I love, so I have to put it in the comments then also. So Fracture and Little Dead Red.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to just type that in while you guys
type it in right now.
I'm not
first, and probably most importantly, what is the name of your dumb dog?
It's Acorn. So we call her Acorn Dog, which also is a corn dog. So we'll probably call her Corn Dog more than anything else. She's a Chiweenie.
Yes.
Rescue. She's so cute. She's half Dachshund, half Chihuahua. And we rescued her last year for my littlest birthday. And she came from a very abusive home. So it's been a really wild year of just being very soft and gentle. And
try to make her an actual corn dog. Were they doing the whole eat the dogs, eat the cats thing?
They're definitely eating the pets.
She was rescued from a home with over 40 animals. 40 dogs came out, and she was 7 years old and had never been spayed. And so she just was a puppy mill thing and very afraid. She hates, if your phone dings, that terrifies her. I don't know what she associates that with, but one day my husband took off his belt and she just peed. And it was so sad.
So sad.
This just turned into a Sarah McLachlan video.
I'm sorry that I can bring any room down like that.
I love it. Now, these are usually qualifications that I look for in a friend.
Right? Not anymore.
But now that he's with you and he's getting all the love he didn't get.
Yeah.
3 kids who probably are so excited to have
just adore her, but are also very quiet and gentle around her and so kind. And
I love little Chai half breeds. I have to say, I have a weakness for them. For many years, we lived with my elderly mother and we're taking care of her. And she had 2 also elderly little Chai half breeds. One was a Chai Jack Russell.
Oh, cute.
Found on the streets, rescued. When she was rescued, she was pregnant. And we also had her daughter, who was a part Chai, part Jack Russell, part Pomeranian.
Oh, I can't picture that.
She looked like a little weasel, and I called her Lady Weaselton.
Oh, I love Lady Weaselton.
I mean, her name was actually Jenny. My mother named her after me, and she looked like a weasel.
Jen, just add that to your list of the traumas you're still working through.
Yeah, it's in some of my nonfiction.
I just want to know, when you have half Chai dogs, do they shake more than, equal to, or less than a full Chai dog as far as like the Chihuahua shakes? Like, does that get bred out, or does it get amplified? Because I feel like
it didn't get bred out with ours.
Yeah, yeah, you never know.
Ours is less. Ours is less.
That's good. That's good, because I always feel so bad for them. Like, are you cold? Do you want a sweater? Maybe.
And they're like, no, I'm totally fine.
No,
Yeah,
I'm fine. This is just how I am.
Yours is working through all the trauma, and I feel like you put a lot of the trauma maybe in the story you wrote that was written. I didn't see the dedication to Jennifer Ann Gordon, but I feel like it probably was, because when I was reading through, and I'll just back up and say we are waiting for, and hopefully we'll be joined by editor Tom Deady, who pulled all these stories together, and they are vintage stories, or stories inspired by those vintage pulp horror paperbacks that we all loved. And that's why the cover has the rack, and it isn't like somebody on a rack. It's the kind of paperback rack that we
beautiful
love.
spinner rack that
we love those. I want one personally.
I have one, and it's amazing.
My cats would knock it over. I can't have one for at least till they stop knocking everything over.
I had one for years because I owned a comic book store and a vintage vintage paper, vintage books. So I had one, but then when the comic book store went away, the vintage rack went away. But I blame and credit the spinner rack at Sully's Superette in Manchester, New Hampshire, for the reason why I love horror, because
the best stuff was in there.
The best stuff was on there.
Exactly. And you spin it and it's like, ooh, what's coming? Ooh, what's on the next? Like, ooh, there's that one. And you kind of move the ones back. Like, I wish our library still had them, because there's nowhere in our library that has them anymore. And I feel like this is a lost art, that spinner, and I would like it back. But these stories really are so eclectic, and there's something for every kind of taste. And if I were to say, well, which will be Jennifer Ann Gordon's favorite, it would have been yours, Mercedes, simply because the style, the lush prose, it's like, it felt like
the fact that you said the words, is she crazy or is she haunted, is like the basis of all of my work. It's the basis of my memoir stuff and all of my horror.
I have to read. I wrote down your titles. I have to read everything that you've ever written.
I know, when I got to that line, I screamed, and I'm like, I feel like I wrote this.
If I would have guessed, I could have said, oh, Jennifer must have contributed this and wrote it under a pseudonym of some established author. That is odd. Jen, you can't claim to be a Bram Stoker.
I can't steal author. Mercedes' identity.
You can't do it. It's just rude.
That makes me so happy. Okay.
Yeah, I loved it. So tell us how you came up with the idea. Tell us everything you can without giving away how
without spoiling
stinking beautiful this story is.
I just well, I was afraid, actually, when Tom asked me to contribute. I was like, oh, so excited, right? Because that lineup is just amazing. Those authors are amazing. I'm so honored. But I was afraid that maybe my story wouldn't fit in, because when you think of, the rack, you think a little more pulpy, maybe a little more
giant bugs.
Yeah, just like that. Just kind of joyous sort of, kind of story. And I was afraid that mine might be too ephemeral for it. But he was like, oh, this works. So I was so delighted. I wanted to write a haunted house story in reverse. Because I love haunted house stories. They're probably one of my very, very favorite, tropes. But I'm tired of the house always being evil. And I'm tired of the house, like, why doesn't the house want people in it? Why are they always yelling for people to go away and this sort of thing? And I thought, what if the house isn't evil? What if it's just mysterious and there's love there? And so I wrote these characters, the seawater boy. I'm madly in love with him. He shows up.
I'm madly in love with him.
He shows up in a bunch of my work in different forms. So there are often, sweet, tender, tragic boys that kind of show up in my stories. So he's just there in a bunch of them. And I just liked the characters, and I just wanted to write something that was me, and didn't want to try to fit in that pulp area, because that's not who I am. That would feel very forced. I just sat down and wrote, and it was very easy. It's kind of an introvert's haunting, I think.
And
Yes,
it's so
I love that.
beautiful. And I will say because I love the concept of this anthology. And when I first heard about it, I thought, I'm so jealous that I'm not in it. And then I thought, well, my work I wouldn't be able to write a story that would be in there. And then I read yours and I read Gwendolyn Keist's.
And then
And
it's like, you
and I
gotta
was
trust
like,
this Tom
oh,
guy, who I'm gonna add to the stage right now, because here he is.
Yay!
Hi, everyone.
Oh,
I'm-
look,
dramatic entrance
I
by
am
Tom.
so sorry. I'm such a scatterbrain. I'm like looking through the email for the link. I'm
you are
here.
And for the people who are listening, and so they don't know, it looks like he's outside and he's got a beautiful daylight, but he has in the foreground of his picture the rack on the rack. There we go.
Ooh, nice.
Yes.
So good. Tom, welcome. We were just talking about Mercedes' fantastic story.
Yes.
And Allison and I were both gushing, and I was like screeching about how I was like, oh, I feel like this was made for me. And telling her that she's like now my new inspiration. And so it's just like basically me about to start crying because I love Mercedes.
You saved us there from some more awkward moments, but we want to welcome you.
Mercedes' story is so beautiful. It's probably not exactly what you would find on the rack back then, but when I read it, I just had to have it. I mean, when we did the launch party, I was reading some lines from some of the stories, and the writing is just so beautiful. I had to have it.
And I feel like on the spinner racks of my youth, it wasn't just the giant bugs. It wasn't just the killer clowns, because there was also the V.C. Andrews books were there.
Yeah.
And the occasional old Gothic romance reprinted with a flashy, crazy cover. Because I remember getting a copy of The Conjure Wife, which was really just like 1950s Gothic about like wives of professors who are also witches. But I remember it had like this crazy cover that I thought, oh my gosh, this is about like a killer.
Do you still have that? Because I want to see that cover.
I don't, but I'm going to like look for it on eBay because.
Well, and Tom, we thank you for not saying, sorry, Mercedes, this doesn't really fit because what I love so much about this anthology is that it fits so many different tones that it's so enjoyable to read. Because sometimes you get an anthology and there's a theme and then you get tired of it after a couple of weeks. Yeah, I was always like, I would take like a break to like let it sit and then I'd go to the next one. But everyone was like a variety pack. You're pulling out a different Skittle flavor each time, and they all just worked deliciously. You could do a whole handful together.
So that was actually one of the challenges I faced in inviting people, because immediately they said, okay, what's the theme? And I said, it's not really a theme, it's a vibe. And if you don't know what it is, then maybe you're not the right person for this. It is hard to explain what the theme is, and it's almost like you had to be there.
Yes, I was going to say, the people who are like, we know what would be on that rack.
Right.
These stories fit that. So if you didn't know the rack, then you won't know what to expect, but you'll still enjoy this, because if you like horror, or if you like well-written fiction, you're good.
Yeah, I haven't developed a good pitch for it yet at events. I was at Silver Screen this past weekend, and like my generation totally gets it right off the bat. The younger generation is just kind of looking at me, and I guess I gotta maybe weave in like a creep show vibe, pitch or something like that. But yeah, a lot of people just they don't understand. It's one of those.
They don't understand going to the drugstore and seeing that spinner
Oh my
rack
God,
and
that
going,
was heaven.
Like, so before you came on the show, I was saying that I credit the spinner rack at Sully's Superette in Manchester, New Hampshire, for the reason why I'm the kind of horror fan I am, because it was right there at the register, and my dad is the one that did groceries, and he never questioned if I wanted a book. And especially because it was like the 80s, half these books had creepy kids on the cover anyways, or a doll, or a fun house ride. So it all looked, I'm like, Dad, this one's clearly about dolls.
Totally fine, Dad.
It's fine for a 9-year-old.
Right.
And he's like, fine, if it's going to keep you quiet.
Yeah, when Dad took us shopping, we got away with things that Mom would never have said yes to. So thanks, Dad. But I do think it is interesting because, so I was mentioning that our library doesn't have a spinner anymore because our original library did. Those kind of things have gone out of fashion. And I do understand just the durability of books. And now there's more stuff available. Just, okay, wait, we'll download the ebook version, which is fine. But the having it, the sneaking around with it is not the same when it's on a Kindle than it is when it's this physical book that you're like pulling out of your backpack when the teacher has left. It's that kind of vibe. And kids today don't get it. And
it's not even, and that's definitely a big part of it, is having the physical book, but finding the book. I mean, you're just scrolling online on Amazon. It's just not like spinning this thing and like, oh, there's one behind that one.
Yes.
Oh my God, I loved the rack.
Do you have a very specific memory of certain books that you bought that way and discovered?
Yeah, I actually talk about it in the afterword, and it's when people ask me why am I a horror writer, it's the same story. I was just on that brink between like kids. Like, we didn't have like young adult when I was growing up. It was either like kids books or adult books, and there was no real distinction. So I had worn out everything I had I could read at the library. I was too old for like Hardy Boys and stuff, which I had grown up on. I was probably 12, and I went to my store and I'm spinning the rack literally, and I find this book. I should have put it out here. I have it in the RV behind me. All black cover, Single Drop of Blood, which is of course the Salem's Lot paperback cover. I picked that thing up, bought it, read it, and never looked back from that moment.
Love it.
I love that. Yeah, when I read the afterword, I got chills with that because though I didn't find it on Spinner Rack, my first Stephen King was Pet Sematary, and it was because my uncle had probably found it on a Spinner Rack, and it was at our house. And I remember thinking, is this a grown-up book about a cat?
Right?
And I, of course, swiped it, and then immediately you find out pretty soon in Pet Sematary this is not a kid's book.
It's not a kid's book.
But I was so deliciously scared and sad at the same time, and that's when, so Mercedes, this is what it segues right into why I loved your story. It was both spooky and sad, and I love that kind of horror.
That's your vibe.
It's my vibe, but I also I love these covers.
I do, and here's the thing. So the other thing about these kind of books, and I want to say kind of how your uncle passed it to you, maybe not even intentionally. My sister, and this is like a running joke with Jennifer and I, is that my sister was the one who was always trying to get me to read the darker things. And she's the one who was on me for probably close to a decade of read Stephen King. I'm like, no, too scary. No, too scary. Stephen King is, of course, in this anthology, which is amazing. But it was Stephen King's, it was those kind of anthologies. And I believe for ours, it was Skeleton Crew that my sister's like,
yeah.
No.
Yes.
But it's those books hiding around the house, and it's, slipping the sister the book, going, read it. Mom said you could read it. Mom didn't. I'm 4 years younger, so I was not allowed to read the book. But you know what? Mom doesn't know.
Mom doesn't know a lot. I mean,
Mom
Yeah.
knew a lot, which is why she was like, not for you. And then she forgets, because the other story I love to share, my mother is dead now, so she can't stop me from
She
saying
can't ground you.
She can't ground me anymore. I don't live in her house anyway, so good luck with that. Was she did not like how much Anne Rice I was reading, and it occurred to us much later that she knew more about Anne Rice than she was letting on, because how would she know that I shouldn't be reading it if she hadn't read what was inside? And ended up giving me, again, another paperback. She gave me The World According to Garp. So she forgot what was in The World According to Garp before I read it.
Which I would argue The World According to Garp is more scarring than anything you would find on the Spinner Rack.
Especially because I knew that the vampire stuff, despite what Anne Rice may have said, was not real, whereas everything in Garp felt awfully just so true to life. I'm like, oh shit, all this stuff happened. This is terrible. Is there another? And then I wrote both of those loves. Anne Rice is one of my favorites. John Irving's one of my favorites. So I mean, there's but there's different ways to be traumatized.
So Tom, because you made a dramatic entrance after the show had already started, tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about you, and then we've already been talking about the rack, but tell us when you got the idea to create this anthology. So a little bit about you as a person, fun facts.
Okay. Yep. I grew up in Malden, Massachusetts, so I was right down the street from Salem, spooky Salem. my biggest influence as a horror reader was my older brother. He's actually about 10 years older than me, and he still has every paperbacks from hell book. He's got thousands of mass market paperbacks in his house, and he used to let me borrow them, you know, when I was cutting my teeth on this stuff. And, you know, he saw me reading Salem's Lot, and he's like, if you like that, try this. And that was it. And, you know, it's funny because I always knew I wanted to be a writer. When I read Salem's Lot, and then that fall in high school, I was probably a freshman or probably a sophomore. We had to write a short story, just creative writing, and no shock, I wrote a vampire story, and my teacher loved it, and she's like, let's put this in Boojum Rock, which is our, you know, high school new magazine. And I was such an introvert and such a nerd. I'm like, no, then people will know I wrote it. We can't do that. And I'm like, I always wonder what would have happened if I had done that and maybe started then, because I didn't really start writing seriously until I was about 50. You know, I had done a lot of writing, but nothing that I ever tried to get published. And so Haven was my first novel. I wrote it on and off over about a 15-year period while I was helping raise my daughters. And I tell my two daughters that are fully grown now that it's their sibling. It's their third sibling. Because,
Mercedes, show us the sibling for your children
I was going to say, we have some very interesting siblings on the show today. I love it.
Oh, a black skeleton. That's cool.
Elegant man.
Very cool. So I finally decided I'm going to finish this book, and it was this perfect storm of things that happened. I was writing. My friend and I were huge Red Sox fans back in the day, and we had been blogging.
You have to, by law, as a New Englander.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but I've got the tattoo. And,
nice.
Yeah.
I did a burlesque number to Shipping Up to Boston by Dropkick Murphys.
This isn't as cool, but
I have the flu and COVID together.
Oh, see, my doctor didn't have the new COVID one, so I'm gonna have to go back and get poked again. But
yeah, so we were doing this blog back in 2004 when blogs were cool, and we actually had a pretty good following because we were kind of, my buddy and I were kind of wacky in the way we reported Red Sox news. So we get to the end of the year, they end up winning the World Series, and we're like, you know what? If we just put all these blog posts together, we have a book. So
I read that book.
Surviving Grady or Faith?
Yeah. Surviving Grady.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, so you've seen my warts then.
That was the year I moved to the Midwest, and I was so sad that I was not living in New England. When they finally won the World Series, like,
were
I
you
was
like the curse removed when you left? Is that
I thought
Jennifer?
So.
It might have been you.
We were so close before that. So, anyways, continue, Tom.
Yeah. So we put out this book. We're like, this is fun. You know, maybe we'll sell a few books. And then this other guy named Stephen King and his buddy Stuart Onan decided to do the exact same thing and put out Faithful, which sold a few more books than Surviving Grady. But our blog, like I said, our blog was pretty popular. So Onan's people reached out to us and said, can you interview him on your blog as, you know, promotion? And I'm like, yeah, definitely. So I had already been a Stuart Onan fan because he used to write dark fiction back in the day. Night Country was one of the greatest ghost stories I've ever read. So I interviewed him. We published the thing on the blog, and I just stayed in touch with him over the years. And like, I think it was 2012, I had the draft of Haven done, and I'm like, hey, you know, so all this time we've been talking about baseball, I've been writing this book. Do you want to read it? He not only did he read it and give me a kick-ass blurb, he basically edited the whole thing for me. Yeah, I owe everything to Stuart Onan. And so at the time, he had been working with Cemetery Dance to do limited editions of some of his older books. And just like I said, Perfect Storm, Cemetery Dance open for submissions, which they never do for books. And I submitted, and Brian Freeman got back to me, and he's like, Richard really wants to read your book, Richard Chismar, who runs Cemetery Dance. And I'm like, great. And I just pretty much stopped trying to get it published anywhere else because Cemetery Dance was like dream market for me. So after 2 years of bullying Richard to actually read it,
Remember.
yeah,
There's a different kind
said,
of timeline with Cemetery Dance.
it took a while. So it was right around this, a little bit before this time of year in 2014. I'm like, listen, I haven't been subbing this book anywhere because you wanted to read it. I just need to know, should I be looking around? He said, I promise you I will read it this weekend. And he did. And that Monday I had a contract. And, 2 years later, the book came out in the beautiful hardcover edition that he did. And once he read it and gave me the contract, I said, I'm going to take this more seriously. And I went back to school and got my master's in English and creative writing, and just really just kicked up the writing from there. And, I love where I am and I love what I'm doing. I just wonder what would have happened if I had just been doing this my whole life.
I think we all think that. I always joke that. So my first book, Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, came out in 2000, like a week before lockdown. The perfect timing. And I always joke that book took 20 years and 2 months to actually write. Like it was 20 years me screwing around thinking it was a play. And then I thought it was a graphic novel. And then I was like, maybe it's a screenplay. I don't know how to make a screenplay.
It's all of those things. It started as...
Yeah. It was, and then, I write Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, and it gets out there, and then it wins a bunch of littler awards, but still awards, like ones that gave me money. And I'm like, wow. And I'm like, I should have been doing this before I was
and
more mature age.
Right. But things also have changed, because I know I see and I know that I struggle with the if I would have, because when in the era in which I grew up, the idea of being a writer was not something you could just do because of all of these, the 2-year timelines. Well, what are you doing for the 2 years while you're waiting? And so my more conservative, economically speaking, parents were like, you will go to school and become a. So it was always, I will be a writer in the margins of life. And then it's like, oh, when I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'll be a writer. And my kids had like way different ideas about how much time they wanted to take up when they were like never sleeping. But I totally get that. And I feel like the flip side is we are telling different stories than we would have told at 20. We are,
absolutely true.
Yeah.
The stories that we are telling and the maturity and the vantage point, those things all are things we would not have had if we were writing at that. But that doesn't mean like we weren't writing those times. We just may not have let anyone see those things, and probably for the better for a lot.
Yeah. Haven is started so long ago. I don't know if you guys remember Writer's Digest magazine.
Oh, yeah.
They had mail order writing classes, and that was where 1995, that's where Haven started. My instructor was, I think his name was Michael Garrett. He used to do the Hot Blooded series, which was like horror erotica almost, I think. I never really read it, so I don't know, but it was Hot Blooded, it was called, and it had a ton of volumes out. But I still have some of the typewritten pages that I snail mailed back and forth with him for edits. So my gosh, took a while.
Well, and I tell my kids, I learned how to type on a typewriter, and they just look at me like, okay, was the world
like, what even is that? What
they know that it exists from like cartoons, but they don't think it was a real thing, and then they start guessing my age, and I send them to their room without supper.
Yeah, my kid said to me, "You were born in the 1900s."
Yeah, when they start
I don't like it when they call it that.
Oh, you don't get to say, you don't get to call it that. Yes.
Yeah, please don't call it that.
It's so rude. But
that's why we get the vibe.
Yes, that's why
we do.
We get the vibe.
What you would need to do to make it Gen Alpha appropriate, because I've seen all that stuff, and when my kids start going yacht and skibbity, I'm like, get out of my car, because I don't want to deal with any of that. And and it's even weird, like the generational cusp, because I'm a Gen Xer, but I'm a couple years older than my husband, and so he is not. And so there's like this whole thing, and then my children, they fall on one of the lines too, and I'm like, no, you're all just whatever. We don't know what you're called yet. Alpha, electronic, digital. It's nonsense, and you're too young to have like that voice yet. Figure it out in a couple years and stop saying words that make no sense because I
Well,
just
see, I'm lucky because my husband is 10 years younger than me, but he grew up in Russia. So it was
That's
the
totally
same
great.
pop culture things
Yes.
that I had because they were 10 years behind. So weirdly, we mesh pop culture wise, even though he's a millennial and I am a Gen Xer, a proud Gen Xer.
Whatever, man. Whatever.
Whatever.
Yeah, you know,
we don't need titles.
I kind of hate those labels. It's just another way to categorize people, which I try not to do. So
You're like, let people be people.
I don't even know what the different categories are, to be honest. So
and honestly, neither do a lot of people in it. And the things that a lot of people who are in that kind of the end of the 70s, early 80s, there were so many different things that happened then that we kind of are in our own weird world anyway. And I still love, like, people called us, we're the Goonies, which I accept. And
there you go.
I would like to be.
We're the Oregon Trail generation, which is also correct because we're the ones, and my mother, who was a substitute teacher, got killed off by dysentery.
Yep.
Not crossing the river, something, we ran out of food. No one ever could get their little bullet to hit the little bison and fall. I mean, that's what we grew up on. And my kids are over there. My child likes to yell at us because he's constantly making movies and he thinks the whole house is a set, and he'll just start screaming. Because he's like, I don't have iMovie. I'm just like, we had Oregon Trail. Be quiet. Like, be glad you have something you can do this with. Because my sister and I would have like a little tape recorder, and that's all we could do. And we're like making our own news shows, and she's running around with a Kermit the Muppet and making me laugh so hard I pee. He won't have that experience because he
won't have that because he's making an actual film. I read issues of the National Enquirer into a tape recorder and pretended I was Barbara Walters.
I'm sure you were a very good Barbara Walters. And honestly, that probably would have been one of the good stories in here because that's more the era. And I did like, so the getting back to the rack, which was why we were here, the whole feel, like so many of these stories, some of them were modern set, but there were a lot of them that had the feel of having been set, not necessarily like at the age when we were kids. Like that's when they were like, yeah, this feels like it could have been for me. And then it had kind of a variety too. So I feel like it would relate to a lot of different readers who they could find essences of their childhood or their young adult or that point in their life when the coming of age went wrong, which is what horror is.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm going to get a lot of credit that I don't deserve for that because all I did was ask 20 awesome writers for stories that fit this kind of ephemeris vibe that I was going for, and somehow they all figured out what I wanted, and
they understood the assignment.
They did, somehow they did because I know I didn't explain it that well. And yeah,
but that's the power of this vibe.
Yes, but also that you were able to tell 20 people and know that when they would turn it in, it would be a group project, for lack of a better word, that really works, that pulls together things in a way where you go, this feels like there were thousands and these were effortlessly sewn together with these seamless words between these things where you get the beautiful haunted house and you get the creature feature and you get these different things that maybe you wouldn't expect all in one, but that it works. So, I mean, if all you did was put them in the right order, you did good.
And what are the odds I'm going to get a story called Black Pages and White Pages to perfectly bookend the end? I mean, like, it's not like they each knew they were writing stories with those names. It was just, everything just fell into place so beautifully for this. And
that gives me chills.
Can we talk about Lynn Hanson's cover for a minute?
Yeah, I do want to talk about it. So, love Lynn so much. And this, she knocked it out of the ballpark.
It's unbelievable. If she could have like reached into my head and picked out what I wanted, even though I didn't know what I wanted, that was it. All I did was say, I want a rack. And that's what she came up with. I was like,
so people watching this, I know I'm holding up the cover. If you haven't seen the cover online, please look at it, but buy the physical book because there is so much detail. Like the rack actually has other little covers with the stories on it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I loved it so much. Like I knew, I had gotten an copy because you guys were coming on the show. And then I bought a Kindle version because I wanted you to have those numbers on opening day. And then I was like, but I also need a paperback. And
this is how Jennifer functions when this is her love language is multiple copies in multiple formats.
Oh, you don't want to know what I have at home. So.
I know there are like certain things where I'm like, how many copies of this book do I need?
All of them.
All of them.
Need Jennifer
for the Stephen King books that I have. I mean, I have every edition of every book he's written.
And
so
not
speaking of Stephen King, it is normal. It's normal and healthy and good. There is a Stephen King story in this that I know.
And I hadn't read it, and I'm like,
what?
And I was like, wait a second. And my sister's like, yeah. And I'm like, that was probably one of the ones that you were trying to make me read, isn't it? And she's like, yeah. Because I've read some of the more recent collections, the ones that are like, oh, yeah, this is darker. This is darker. Well, that was traumatic. And so I've read a lot of the later ones. I'm like, how did I miss that one? And I've read the Bachman books, and I've read most of his stuff, but somehow that one escaped me. So it was nice because it was it's new to me.
Right. I think it will be new to a lot of the younger generation. You know, even if people saw the adaptation on Creepshow, they might not have ever read the actual story.
Right. So I know with Richard Chizmar, obviously having a story in this, and for people who don't know, who aren't like horror obsessed, Richard Chizmar is the author of the Boogeyman books. He is also the co-writer with Stephen King of the Gwendy series, and he and Stephen King are friends. So did you ask Richard, like, hey, can you hook me up, or did he offer?
I would portray it more as begged, but yes.
Okay. We are really in favor of begging in order to contact the people that we love and admire.
This is how we get some of the guests for our show. Is just begging.
I am to the point now where I just don't care. Like, it doesn't hurt to ask, it doesn't hurt to beg either. So I originally asked him if he thought there was any chance King would write the introduction to this, and he laughed. And he said he just doesn't do that anymore, but he'd probably give you a reprint. And he gave me the right people to hook up with. And now, again, I had no say. I just said, can I have a story, please? And I don't know how it happened that they gave me the raft, but that is
because it's perfect.
It's absolutely perfect. Like, they must have felt the vibe even through whatever communication channels made it to them. They felt that vibe because it works so perfectly with the other stories.
It really fit in. It really did.
Mercedes, when Tom asked you to be part of this, did he tell you some of the other authors that were involved, and what did that do to your nervousness level, your panic level?
Oh, my panic level is always to hear. So
okay, good.
I don't think you did, Tom. I think we were talking about something else, and you're like, oh, hey, I have this thing coming out. I'm working on. Do you want to write a story? And I was like, oh yeah, because I love Tom. I would love to work with Tom. And then I think later when I found out some of the authors, my jaw just dropped because they're phenomenal. This is a big sandbox, so I was really excited. It's probably it's probably for the best I didn't know, but I tend not to be that intimidated because my work, it sounds a lot like your work, but normally is pretty unique and in its own little sphere. So I can't really compare myself to other people because I kind of write in a different little, I call it whimsical horror. Little. Yeah,
I usually call it like lyrical horror or something like that. Where I'm like,
yeah, exactly. So, but I mean, when I found out afterward, and then we had this amazing that launch party.
That was fun.
So much fun because we're, I would say most of us were on there just like talking and chatting, and it was so cool to see these authors and talk about their stories. But I mean, I know most of them, I don't think there were any strangers really on that.
Well, I know Jennifer and I were joking because so I was reading from start to finish, and Jennifer's like, well, I started with reading like, she knew that Mercedes was coming on the show, so of course she wanted to read hers. But then she's like, then I started reading guess who's been on our show. So she's jumping around that way, doing that.
Yeah, I did Mercedes, and I was like, guests that have been on the show, and then people that I know in real life but haven't been on the show, and then people that I know just online but haven't been on the show.
And then as I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, I don't know this author. Now I'm following them on social media. So sorry to all the authors who suddenly were getting stalked. I'm just interested. That's all.
Well, I stalked you this morning.
I know. I'm like, oh, well, when like Tom, you had a hard time finding the show. I'm like, but I know he knows about it because he friended me this morning. I'm like, hi. But I love the lineup because it is a variety of authors. So you knew who to ask. You knew who to say so that we weren't getting repeated stories or even repeated
Yeah.
feels, that we had that variety so that it reads just so richly rather than like, yeah, it's good, but it's all the same flavor. It's just this variety that just works so well together as like the smorgasbord of horror, which
And that's you know, I've wanted to do some anthology for a while, and I didn't know why. I love Stephen King's It is my favorite book. And I just love like creepy clowns and stuff like that. So I was going to do this clown anthology. I'm like, people aren't going to want to read 20 clown stories. They're just not like, so I was trying to think of something unique, and I was on a different interview. Oh, this was over a year ago where I finally got the idea for this. And they were talking about exactly what I told you about earlier. Like when they asked how you became a writer, and I told them the story, and I'm like, that's the book. That's the anthology. What am I doing?
Well, and it is funny because the one thing that it kind of carries on is the used bookstore and the used bookshelf. That has kind of a similar vibe. And you made me think of it when you said the creepy clown, because I was going to say this earlier and we moved on. So I did the summer reading program because I'm a good library patron. My children didn't keep up because they didn't like color in the squares. I colored my squares. And so even though I did not win the grand prize of probably like a used pair of earbuds or whatever, I got to pick them up. Now, my TBR is super, super stupid long, and do I need more books? No. And do I buy more books anyway? Yes. But do I need to just like, pick some random book? No. And so they literally had one of those library carts. It's only about yay high, right? So it's not very tall. And it was like top row was adult books, middle row was young adult, and the bottom row was kids. So I looked at the adult books, and most of them were nonfiction, and I didn't want to read any of that. And I didn't see anything that I wanted. And then I called over my kids, and I said, do any of you want one of the kids' books? And they kind of looked and went, eh. So I'm like, all right. And I almost just walked away and didn't get something. And then my eye caught on a red.
I know what she got.
I know. A red spine in the young adult thing. And there's Clown in a Cornfield.
No, it is young adult.
Yeah. What's that doing? I'm like, this isn't YA. And I pull it out because Jennifer and I had both read Influencer. And I haven't read any more of Adam. Is it Cesare?
I say Cesar, but I don't know if that's right.
I said Cesar, and then somebody that wasn't him corrected me that it was actually Caesar. And I'm like,
way fancier and like floofier, and it's just like, no, it's just Caesar. And I'm like, this was something I wanted to read anyway, and there you go, because I would never have just found that book otherwise. But there it was as a freebie, brand new copy from my library, and I'm going, I don't care if it's YA, I'm taking it. And
you know, it's funny you bring that up because it is marketed as YA, but it's pretty much on the edge as far as if I were rating it. It's pretty adult.
I feel like because it doesn't have graphic sexual things in it, now that's the bar. Like it can be super violent. I don't understand
where the line is anymore.
No, and neither do I. And this also comes from, I was working my kids' book fair last spring, and found the kid horror section, and I took a picture, and Jennifer's like, I want this one and that one. So I sent her. So it's like,
I did.
It doesn't matter. Like you were getting, what was it, Delilah Dawson books, and they're marketed for 8 and 9-year-olds. And sure, I don't know what the level inside. I didn't read it. I don't know if you've read it yet either. I just sent it to you. But I think some of those lines about what the graphic level is, not how actually scary it is or how well written it is, that's that line. And I just finished reading Chuck Tingle's Camp Damascus, and I didn't realize, oh, that's YA. Well, I didn't know.
I didn't know that.
It wasn't listed as YA in my cloud library, which is where I got it from. So, I mean, I think the thing is you can find things where you least expect them, even in your library summer reading program giveaway, marketed at the YA section. Still get them. Still good.
So before we end for today, Tom and Mercedes, what are you both working on now?
Go ahead, Mercedes.
Oh, well, I'm working on a novel that I'm shopping around. I'm looking for a new agent because I split with mine last year, and I think I'm ready to take that on again. But it's a process.
It's not a fun process.
And do I really want one? Do I not? I was fine without one. I had one. Oh, Tom knows. So
I do.
I see Tom shaking his head. Right now.
There's a story here. There's a backstory here. And I will say, and this
There
is
is.
Jennifer and I
For
talk
another
about.
time.
Yeah,
Jennifer-
probably not an on-air story.
Well, and Jennifer, because Jennifer is a horror writer, I am not a horror writer. People have asked, "Are you sure this isn't horror?" I'm like, I didn't mean for it to be. But I mean, I write romance and I write also in speculative fiction. Horror is this unique place where you can get by without one. Because the legitimacy of these smaller indie presses, it's not necessarily the case in a lot of other genres. So I understand Mercedes, it's a thing. So having parted with it, my hat, I'm not wearing a hat off to you if you decide to.
Yeah.
I'm
removing my scalp to you, Mercedes.
Why, thank you. So right now, I have a short story collection that is up for pre-order now for 99 cents.
What's
and
that
it's
called?
releasing from Cemetery Dance on September 27th. And I'm so excited, you guys, because Cemetery Dance was my white well, right? Like Cemetery Dance and Weird Tales. But it's called Love is a Crematorium and Other Stories.
That cover, again,
cover.
is so good. And that was Keelan Patrick Burke, right?
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
And Keelan, also, again, former guest of our show. We love Keelan.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun.
Outstanding cover.
Yeah.
Love is a Crematorium and Other Stories.
Yeah, Other Tales, but just Love is a Crematorium is all that's on the.
Okay, I just posted it so people can
And
find
the
it.
cover is a woman with her head on fire.
Oh,
They're like, what would you like? And I'm like, there's a lot of rage here, so maybe this for a concept, and Keelan just nailed it. But Gabino Iglesias does the introduction for it. And I love him. So, yeah, it's a very angry and sad and tragic and beautiful thing. But so that's what I'm working on right now because it's just coming out really fast. And I'm like, oh, but I'm working on different stories, different calls, starting a new novel. I usually have like 6 projects going on at one time, and maybe I should.
Hey,
But
if that works for you, honestly,
I'm not so sure if it does.
well, it doesn't for me, but I've been forced to make it work, and I don't know if it's made things better. So, if I don't ever want to tell somebody what's working for them, if it's working, well, you should do it differently. Like if it's working for you, but if you're
I feel like most of the authors we talk to, we always ask, like, what are you doing? What's your process? What's this? And everyone's like, I don't know if it's the right way. It's not going good.
Well, if
Seems
the
like it
result
could be
is you had
easier.
good words that got out to an audience who read it and liked it, then I'm going to say worked. Can it be improved? Maybe. Who knows? I don't know. Drink more coffee. That's your process.
I was like, drink more. Oh, coffee.
And what about you, Tom? Are you pulling out new calls for no people? So if more horror authors are like, I want to be in the next frack.
Yeah, let me tell
So-
you, I have an idea.
Yeah, so,
I'm like,
so
okay.
rack related, yes. There's already a volume 2 well in the works. I have another really kick-ass table of contents, but I am going to leave 4 or 5 open spots for an open call. Basically just so people won't complain that I didn't invite them, because that's a thing apparently.
I feel like there shouldn't be complaining, but there was a lot of fear of missing out and
Yeah.
like seeing this amazing table of contents, but also just again the amazing vibe.
Yeah.
Yes. So I've got I'll name a few. I've got a Joe Lansdale story, a Jonathan Mayberry story, Jenny Kiefer, who just kind of hit the charts with this Wretched Valley last year.
I just finished that a month ago.
It's going to be another great lineup. Lynn's coming back to do the cover again, so I'm positive the cover is going to be great. But again, my job is easy. I just say, hey, can I have a story? And sit back and wait for these wonderful stories to roll in.
That's a good job to have.
That's a good job.
It is. I'm like, why am I a writer? I should just be like an anthology master. I do have I just learned the word for this. It's called a duology. It's 2 novellas in a book, 2 Old West horror novels. Novellas, sorry, coming out from Cemetery Dance, hopefully November, but we'll see. It's supposed to be November. I haven't gotten an update or seen the cover yet, so I'm a little skeptical since we're
It's November?
yeah.
Okay, I'm like,
I will tell you, they're overbooked and slow getting on it, but once they get on it, it will be fast. So
Yeah, I mean, he
it
told
was-
me what the schedule is and what books are ahead of me, and he's been right on. So I'm still hoping all of a sudden he's going to say, "Here's the cover, we're almost done." But I don't know.
So have faith, because I was in that same.
I do have faith. Dan's a good guy.
I didn't. I was nervous.
Yeah.
And we have
So
someone saying,
I've got
talk
that
about
coming out.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got the sequel to Eternal Darkness is at about 96,000 words, and I'm closing in on the finish line there. And I have another novella that is part of a secret society collection of 6 novellas. Mine is going to be a story about the Molly Maguires, who were the violent advocates for miners' rights and working conditions and wages and things like that back in the 1800s. So, plus about 1 million other things that aren't anywhere near completion, but those are the things that are coming soon.
Well, and I don't know if this comment, and the username is MJ1804, talk about a Murderer's Row lineup. I don't know if it's talking about the table of contents for this book or just what you're working on, Tom, because I think it applies to both. Because
it will. It's gonna be another great lineup. I'm already dying to start taking the stories in and getting this going. But it'll probably be about the same time next year that it comes out, maybe sooner.
Well, we already are excited for it as well. Thank you, Tom, for being here. Mercedes, thank you so much for coming. We adore you both. Everyone watching this live or the replay or just listening to the audio, please, 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 please buy the rack. I can honestly say I haven't had this much fun reading an anthology in so long.
Thank you.
Yeah, I laughed. I was crying reading Mercedes because it was so beautiful.
It is really.
I was just like, so yeah, thank you. I reached out to like several of your authors just because I loved it so much. I sent who I know, Candace, but I sent a little message to Candace Nola because I loved her story so much. I sent a message to Steve right when I finished his. I'm like, oh my God, that was so much fun.
And I'm
Stephen Sampson.
Yes.
I didn't know what a wheel bug was until I read his story, and then I went out and found a video of one, and it was horrifying.
Like, I did not need to see
You're
that.
like, oh,
No.
that's awful. Thank you, Steve.
Picturing a giant one of those is just terrifying.
Yeah, terrifying, terrifying. So yes, please buy the rack. You will not be disappointed. Thank you both for being here. Next week, we are releasing a pre-recorded episode with Johnny Compton, who also just happens to be in the rack, but we will be talking about his new book, Devils Kill Devils. And we are really excited about that. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you all next week.
Thank you.
Bye.